My name is Adam Scott Neal. I'm a composer, teacher, and writer, and I've been fascinated by musical instruments my whole life. Each instrument has personality and colors that create vivid aural images and moods. On this podcast, I talk to people who play, study, and compose for these instruments to uncover their meanings and hear pieces that best show off their personalities. Join me as we open Instrument Cases. Today's episode is about the viola. This is a stringed instrument played with a bow. It's larger than a violin, but smaller than a cello, and it's still played under your chin like a violin. It has 4 strings tuned to C, G, D, and A. And it's an instrument that has long been relegated to supporting parts, but it started to have a true renaissance in the 20th century. To learn more about the viola, I talked to 3 violists. A warm-up question I like to ask is for 3 words that describe the character of the instrument. In order of appearance, we have Mach, a violist and theorist who's currently pursuing a PhD at the Eastman School of Music, University of Rochester. Then we have Darsey, a freelance violist in the Charlotte area. And Katrin Meidell, a professor of viola at the Schwab School of Music, Columbus State University in Georgia. Here's what they said.
I would describe the viola as rich, velvety, and luscious.
Mournfully passionate, and melancholic, and lamenting.
Dark, mellow, warm.
Let's see if we agree. I asked them to tell me some famous moments in the classical literature where you may have heard the viola before. Matt said,
Oh, well, the most famous one is probably the love theme from Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet. And it's us and the English horn that do it first. Which is funny because that's, a love theme, but it's also a tragic love theme.
Mm-hmm.
So of course we're going to play it because it still ends up in death.
I'm about to say a composer, but then I actually also don't think that they write very well for the viola.
Okay.
So bear with me here. So when it comes to the lush and rich sound world, one thing that comes to mind is the 4th movement of Brahms Symphony No. 1. There's that famous melody, like da 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 da. Underneath that is a counterpoint part that Brahms wrote that the viola has. And I just think that that counterpoint line is just so luscious and so juicy.
The opening solo part of Mozart's Sinfonia Concertante actually would be great. So you get this nice echo basically of like first the brightness of the violin, then you get the richness of the viola, and they're playing the same line and they're, having this nice conversation with one another, and you get just this difference of color in voice.
Another really great one is the Roman Carnival Overture by Berlioz. There's this gorgeous melody that goes on for quite a bit, and it's just us, and he knew so well how to write, for us.
Of course, I was curious what led my friends to playing viola. Often, violists start playing violin first. Ash said,
I actually started my musical journey on piano at age 6 and then violin at age 7. I didn't get a choice in my instruments. I was just handed them, like a lot of other Asian households. When I was 10, we had a strings program at my school. However, the teacher knew I played violin and was like, you should learn a different instrument. Otherwise, you'd be bored in this class. So I chose viola naturally.
Matt grew up wanting to play violin, but ended up only playing viola.
So they came when I was in fourth grade at the end of the year and, showed off all the instruments. And so we kind of got to choose. And I was on a violin kick. I wanted to play the violin. So I put that down as my first choice. I put the viola down as my second. And I think clarinet as my third because they wanted you to choose a band instrument, even though I had no interest in being a band kid. When it came time for them to pick, I was one of the last ones to go. And the teacher said, hey, we already have way too many violins. Why don't you play this? And I honestly had no clue what it was. I just, wrote it down, but I was so super excited.
Katrin also started on violin, playing it all the way through college, but had a chance encounter one day.
So I ended up doing a double major in music and in psychology. And in my junior year, I met a viola. I was at a violin shop and the owner said, well, here, you should try this viola. And I said, well, why? I play the violin. Why would I want a viola? He said, no, you should try this viola. Yeah, fine. And he brought out this instrument, and I swear it was like that scene in Harry Potter where he gets the right wand and the light kind of shines and there's the angels singing. And I had played violas before, but this viola was special.
Katrin mentioned that she has since acquired a second viola. This may seem mundane, but professional orchestral instruments are considerable investments, and you really need to wait for a special one to come across your path.
A couple of years ago, I organized and hosted the 2022 American Viola Society Festival and 47th International Viola Congress. One of the events that we had at that conference was an exhibition of modern violas and bows. So luthiers came with their instruments, and on a rare moment when I got a break from organizing and running around and putting out fires, I went and tried a couple of instruments, and there was one that I really liked, and it's the first time since I met the magic viola that I had a connection with an instrument. So having just done the biggest thing I would ever do in my career, I talked to my husband and said, I want to buy another viola. So I've been playing that one more now because it's a lot less stressful to travel with. So my two violas are really, really differently sized and shaped. My original magic viola is fairly small. It's less than 16 inches, which is kind of considered small already. So it's 15 5/8. And my other one is like 17 and a half. So it's like a really, really big difference. What's really surprising about that, though, is that the first position, so where you put your four fingers to create the first set of notes, is the same. So I don't have to like widen my fingers anymore on the bigger viola.
All three have found a lifelong love for the sound of the viola. It's quite distinct, and there are physical reasons why. Ash and Matt filled me in.
So there's a great quote by the composer Paul Schoenfeld. He wrote a viola concerto, and apparently at the first rehearsal, he said that the viola is a naturally reflective instrument. And I think that's really true. And a part of it, I think, is because of the physics and the acoustics of the viola as opposed to the violin or the cello.
It's actually acoustically imperfect. And so to get a true alto sound, the body of the instrument would actually need to be about 20 inches long. But that's just not practical for most human beings. And so actually the body is made smaller. The viola can't resonate or it can't project as well as the violin or the cello, for example.
So for us to have the same sound quality as the violin or the cello, our instruments would have to be much bigger than they actually are. And we'd probably have to play them on our lap like a little mini cello. I don't know why, because there used to be little mini cellos. Like there, when you look at the Viola family from, the olden times, there was a soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, and the tenor just sat right on your lap. And so I don't know when it really happened that we became here instead of the lap. But most of us don't have the physical span to play like a 18-inch, 19-inch instrument, whereas most of ours are probably within the range of 16 to 17 and a half inches.
Actually, back in the classical late Baroque era, people did tend to play on those larger instruments, those larger, like alto sounding instruments, like maybe like 19, 20 inches. That time, viola parts were just like eighth notes. They weren't very technically demanding, and so people could play the parts on larger violas, but as composers started writing more complex parts for the viola, negotiating a larger instrument like that became a much bigger challenge.
The proportions of that make our, especially the upper registers, not as, powerful. We don't have the same brute force that a violin has when they're playing way up high on the G string. When we go high up on the C string, it's a much more, hollow, sort of eerie, ghostly sound. And it's true across the entire instrument to a certain extent. It's much more apparent in the upper registers. And I think that sound and the fact that we are a little bit more constrained with our sound makes it a much more inward focused sound. And I don't know if a lot of composers realize that consciously when they're writing, but I think it has definitely seeped into the underworld of that. And you see it quite a bit in the fact that a lot of music written for us are dirges. It's an elegy. We're an instrument that is weirdly associated with death. And I think probably pound for pound, we have more elegies written for us than probably any other instrument. And I think that composers pick up on that on some sort of level, that our sound is not quite as pervasive as the violin or the cello. It's much more kind of in the shadows. But, there are still wonderful works that put us into a very front-facing sound. But, even that, we still have limitations with our sound that the violin and the cello don't really have.
Next, I wanted to know about the type of music they like to play. Maybe more to the point, what role do they like to have in the music?
We don't often get the melody. That doesn't mean it's not an interesting part, though, because you're like the supporting role. You're what ties together the melody and the bass. And I've always really enjoyed it when, in an orchestra setting, the conductor will ask to hear the violins and the cellos, and then not have the violas or basses play. And it just sounds ridiculously empty.
I don't know. I think anyone can sing a melody, or most people can sing a melody. But an orchestral piece, for example, it's not an orchestral piece if it just has the melody. There's so many layers to a symphony or a tone poem. And all of those layers that are surrounding the melody are what make the piece special. And so I kind of liked adding that. I used to call it like the special sauce to the music, like the counterpoint and the harmonic structure. I really enjoyed playing that. Viola parts kind of go in between being a more bassy part to being a more melodic part. Sometimes we are playing with the violins, maybe an octave lower, but also sometimes we're with the cellos. And so you're kind of going in between that like low voice versus high voice world.
There are some pieces where I love playing the piece because of what the piece is, but I don't necessarily enjoy the part that I'm playing. And then there are things where I enjoy playing the part that I'm playing, but I would never actively choose to listen to that piece. Case in point is, Beethoven, the symphonies. They're not the most exciting things for us to play. The last movement to Beethoven 5 like cripples me at the end, because for the entire last movement, I'm just vibrating as my right hand as much as I can. But it's Beethoven 5, and how can you not want to be engrossed in that sound? I will say that the way that he writes in the string quartets is vastly different, especially in the later ones. And those are just really incredible to play. Once you get past the Opus 52s and a little bit in the Opus 52s, it's really a partnership between all four places or players. So those pieces are just very profound to play, very difficult to play, very rewarding to play.
The instrument has been celebrated and utilized more in the past century. Katrin and Ash let me know more about this.
What's nice is in the early 1900s, viola sort of had an awakening, or the musical community had an awakening and an epiphany that, oh, viola is actually really cool. Yeah, it wasn't loved. The instrument wasn't loved, even though, major composers, Bach, Dvorak, Mozart, they all actually played the viola and they enjoyed playing the viola, but didn't really write a whole lot for it. So kind of a bummer.
So let's think of the piece Der Schwanendreher by Hindemith. It's a viola concerto scored for orchestra with and winds, but there's no violins or violas in the orchestra. I think what's really great about that piece is he understands how the instrument resonates. And so while the piece itself isn't in a key, he utilizes a lot of like C major chords, especially. And what's great about a C major chord on the viola, you can use the open C string. So that opening cadenza, for example, is a C major chord, voiced like C, G, E, E, open C string on the bottom.
Now Ash and I go on a deep dive into the idea of timbre. Timbre refers to the tone color of an instrument. Any given note has multiple resonances called overtones, and each instrument emphasizes these resonances in different ways. Combined with how an instrument starts and ends a note, the attack and release, each instrument has a unique timbre, a unique color. And with practice, you can learn to quickly identify instruments just by hearing these unique timbres. I asked Ash how they got interested in timbre.
So my interest in timbre started in 2019, actually. After my junior year of undergrad, I did a month-long course in Paris. Actually, it was a partnership with the Eastman School of Music and IRCAM in Paris. And that month-long course at that time focused on spectral music. I had never really heard of spectral music. I didn't even know what it was. And it was a mind-blowing revelation for me to realize that a single note, such as, I don't know, an open G string, had an entire world underneath it. I think that actually improved my playing. And the reason for that is because I had a vocabulary like attack transient that translates directly to articulation. When an instructor, for example, said, use a sharper articulation there, then I had this image of an attack transient in my mind that I could refer to. And now that I understood how overtones worked, I was able to maximize the resonance on my instrument.
Ash recently published an analysis of a viola solo, and I asked them to tell me all about it.
This paper called Microformal Transformations to Create Macroform in Tristan Murail's C'est un ardent secret. This analysis is trying to understand how like various sonic gestures that Tristan Murail used, which I called microforms, how do they transition from one idea to the next? And how do those transitions create a macro global structure? There's often this very gradual transition between one sonic gesture or microform to the next. One thing that he does is he actually starts the piece with harmonics in which the violist is barely pressing the string, and out comes like a harmonic of that string. And then there's a gradual transition in which the violist is slowly adding left hand pressure until it becomes a stopped pitch. What I found in this analysis was that there were two kind of main transitions that happened. So in harmonicity to harmonicity, so transition from like a noisier sound to a more like pure sound. There were also transitions from like agitated sounds, and so sounds that used a lot of hard attacks that were often in quick succession with each other. And that would gradually reduce to kind of a resolute sound in which the hard attacks gradually got gradually got softer. And so maybe the difference between like a hard marcato sound to a more legato sound. This global structure, kind of like a global arc between like harmonic sounds to stopped pitches kind of at the peak, and then back to harmonic sounds.
For some listeners, a piece like Murail's might sound strange and challenging, but for me, they go deep into what makes the instrument unique and special, precisely by exploring the very basics of playing, like how hard do I press down on the string, and how fast do I pull the bow. There's something very intimate about listening to pieces like this, which reflects the intimacy that a player has with their instrument. This reminds me about Katrin's description of her relationship with her instruments.
You know, there's a difference with how these wooden instruments are made, where it's not like formed, it's cut. You know, one person slaving over every little angle and cut of the wood. So I really don't know if other instrumentalists have the same sensation, or like a pianist. I don't know if like they sit down at one keyboard and they're like, this is it. I don't know. It's something in the color, the sound of the instrument under the ear. And this is going to sound funny, but I really like the way my violas smell, which is not something you normally think about. But I'd like to smell the F-hole and like, this is the inside of this instrument that's been around for longer than this country that we live in. And there's a real history with that. And I wonder about the story, you know, where has it been and who has it seen, and all of these different adventures that an instrument has gone through shape it. And it's just like a person. And it can't tell you its story the way a person can tell you a story, but each instrument has its own voice.
To bring us home, Matt offered a wonderful quote about the viola by composer Hector Berlioz.
Of all the instruments, the one whose excellent qualities have been longest misappreciated is the viola. It is no less agile than the violin. The sounds of its strings is particularly telling. Its upper notes are distinguished by their mournfully passionate accent, and its quality of tone altogether of a profound melancholy differs from that in other instruments played with the bow. It has nevertheless been long neglected or put to use as unimportant as ineffectual, that of merely doubling an octave the upper part of the bass.
I hope through this episode you've gained more insight and appreciation of the viola. It's a wonderful instrument known for playing somber melodies and inner voices, an instrument that connects low and high and life and death. Thanks to my guests, Matt Darsey, Ash Mach, and Katrin Meidell, and thank you for listening. I hope you'll join me next time when we open more instrument cases.